Privilege to welcome you back to a BW Dialogue. Today, we have a business professional, a women leader, and now an author who's written a book that I've enjoyed reading, and I've recommended it to my daughter and to my young women colleagues and to my men colleagues. Let me welcome Ms. Radhika Gupta, who in her day job is the MD and CEO of Edelweiss Mutual Fund. And she's written this book, which is very, very provocative. It's very authentic, and it is very simple to relate to, called Limitless, the power of unlocking your true potential. So first, let me welcome Ms. Radhika Gupta for this BW Dialogue, and let me also show her book so that you can pick a copy and read it. First of all, Ms. Gupta, welcome to BW Dialogue. I've been doing this for the last 25 months. And I definitely start by asking this question. How have been the last 25 months for you, both personally and professionally?
So thanks, Dr. Batra. Lovely, interesting question. I think the last 25 months have been very unexpected because obviously none of us knew what we were going to jump into. But I truly believe, and I use these words in the book also, there's a strange opportunity in every crisis. So while, of course, you don't take away from everything that COVID has done in terms of its effects on people personally, I think there's just so much that I have gotten through this period. I'll probably never forget it. As a few examples, I've probably never had a better run in business. So that was one. I got the opportunity to write Limitless, which I thought was a project I would take on at 60. And the only reason I managed to do this with a full-time job was because I was not traveling. So that was the crisis and the opportunity. And of course, I'm 8 months into pregnancy. So that's beautiful and that's lovely. So it's been a very it's been a very full but fulfilling period.
Beautiful, full and fulfilling. I think more than full. I keep saying, don't mistake action for progress. So, progress happens. So you're saying it was both, it kept you busy, but it was also very fulfilling. Now, let me come to, how did the idea of Limitless come to you? Of course, when you read the book, your own personal journey, your own personal anecdotes are there, and they give us a sense of why you wrote the book. But tell us, why this book? Why now? Why are you calling it Limitless? I mean, it's self-explanatory to some level, but give us your thought process behind naming the book and writing this book.
So I'll come to the name in a bit. I think like many people, and we all have these beliefs in our head. I always felt that I wanted to write a book because I enjoy writing. I enjoy the craft of words. Not many people know that behind the business profession and business degrees I have, I also studied English literature for a long time. If you ask me my favorite things to do, I have no creative hobbies like singing, dancing, paint, all of this. I can't do any of this. But I've enjoyed playing with words. I although felt that a book is a post-60 project. And this is the kind of conditioning that you have. I also felt that anything I write right now definitely can't be an autobiography because there's so much more to do in that sense. But the book was almost crowdsourced. I think Hatchet came to me in the middle of the lockdown and said, why don't you compile all the talks that you've been doing in the microblogging you've been doing on all these platforms into a book? And while I was very resistant at the beginning, I thought it made sense to get a lot of these ideas together because on a daily and weekly basis, I was sharing thoughts about things that happen at work in life, whether it's small things like rejection or risk-taking or many of the themes. And you would see sort of the engagement, especially from a young audience. And I thought, why not compile them into a book? And that's really what happened. And as I said, COVID gave me the time. Limitless was a title I thought a lot over. In fact, this is one of the books that took forever to be titled. I think titling was the last thing because I really wanted a title that encapsulated the book. I think for a book for young Indians, there couldn't be a better title because I do believe that each of us have limitless potential. We're living in an India of limitless opportunities today. This is a very different India from the one perhaps my father was born into, or the one I was born into. Today, your range of career options, your range of opportunities is really, really vast. The range of challenges you have is also vast. But if you get past all of them, there's really a lot that you can do. So I felt it was appropriate for this audience at this time.
Fantastic. Clearly, it is in India that is really growing, galloping. The speed of recovery from the COVID is fantastic. Also, the vaccination drive. And I always, Radhika, feel that the foreign media is unkind to India. Yes, there are lots of things we can do better, but we get a lot right. The number of people we vaccinated twice, and I want to tell you, when I first got the book, it reminded me of a Bradley Cooper movie called Limitless, which I did watch more like 12, 14 years back. And of course, that was a different topic, different thing. But it did bring smile on my face because I enjoyed that movie. But once I read your book, I definitely, I read maybe 500 such books, but your book was refreshing because it did a very honest storytelling. And the titles of your 8 chapters are very good. And let me start by asking, which one is your favorite chapter and why?
My favorite one is the last one because I think it binds the book together. It is called Choosing Your Sky and Then Learning to Fly. And I believe for each of us, we are almost brought up to be conditioned to believe that there is one path to success. At some point, my father used to say, in his times, it was civil services, there was doctor, engineer. I don't think that there is one path to success. I think there are multiple skies out there. And really, you choose your sky, but it's important to make that choice. And once you do, it's important to have the confidence to fly. So that's the chapter, particularly the last one, that touches on an issue which has perhaps been so core to my heart and the one I get the most questions about, which is finding self-confidence. Finding the ability to go out there and live your best self.
Believing in yourself that you can do it, right?
Yeah.
And
so that one
is fantastic. Now, the first chapter is kicking the shit out of rejection. I mean, it doesn't say shit there, but it says S star T. But I keep saying no means next opportunity, new opportunity.
Nice one.
No, and I keep saying rejection is not rejection, it's redirection.
Yeah.
So when I read your chapter, clearly it re-emphasized what I believe in. Sometimes in personal life, in a relationship, which is business-oriented, a partnership in business, if it doesn't happen, I always believe whatever happens, happens. But anyway, I'm a Hindu, so I believe in preordained and prarabdha. So give us a sense of what is it. You start by saying rejection. Know that it's a part of the syllabus. Mm-hmm. I love my rejection slips. They show me that I try. So give us a sense and give us a story that will stay with our viewers and readers.
A lot of people ask me why I started the book, of course, with a grimmer personal story about rejection. And the book, that's probably the one people know me most closely about, which is campus rejection. And the reason I talk, and till date, it's been 3-4 years since I've talked about that single story about campus rejection. Believe it or not, Dr. Batra, every day I get an email from a random person somewhere in the country with their rejection story. It's very often campus rejection or job rejection. Sometimes, by the way, it is also romantic rejection. And they are these really, really heartfelt stories. In fact, in the introduction, I've given a couple of those stories by masking the names. So I thought I would start with that theme. The reason I said it's part of the syllabus is also there's a beautiful line from, I think, a movie called Chore. It says that, you're always taught and told कि beta मेहनत करो, work hard. अच्छी मेहनत करोगे तो you'll get into a good school, then you'll get into a good college, then you'll marry well, etc. But what if you do all that and it still doesn't work? And I also do believe we live in an India, which is a populous India, where the odds are always competitive. You're not living in a country with very, very few people. So the odds are competitive. If you're applying for Indian Idol, the odds are competitive. If you're applying for the civil services exam, the odds are competitive everywhere. So somewhere along the way, we need to have honest conversations about failure and rejection, and they need to happen in our homes and dining tables because it is a reality. I think it was also important to talk about this because today in the public domain, and particularly in a social media world, if you go to anybody's LinkedIn profile, we are always talking success stories. We're also showcasing success stories. There's tremendous pressure to do that when failure stories are a lot more real.
Fantastic. And in the first chapter you say zoom out. What feels like a big block today may be a small dot tomorrow. So things that feel very big today may not matter in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Look at your own spectacular rise in performance. Your second chapter is about feedback. Accept the friend request. To avoid criticism, to do nothing, to say nothing, be nothing. It is being nothing. So you keep saying you lack emotional maturity, somebody told you. These words stood out starkly in my second performance with you at Edelweiss, right? And look at where you are and look at your performance. Tough criticism from the right people is a friend request you should not ignore. Tell us a bit about that.
So this one, this chapter, I think, is a function of a lot of the work I have done in my own sort of professional journey. I don't believe, and 15 years into this job, 15, 16, I don't believe any of us is a born leader, a born CEO. We are all, in a sense, growth. We are work in progress. But the work in progress happens when you are open to change. One of my favorite stories I give there is a story of, and I'm known a little bit as a public speaker, of my first public speaking experience and the scathing criticism I got for speaking. And even today, and I manage a large team of leaders, I have a lot of leaders who think they are open to feedback, but they're actually not very open. They get very upset by criticism, not realizing that when someone is out there giving you constructive criticism, they deeply care about you. It's not because they want to fire you. It's not because they want to get rid of you. It's not because they have a personal agenda with you. They genuinely care about you, but it's for you to accept that honestly and move forward. So I think the challenges we have are not just rejection. Criticism often is a great way to start finding your path, which is what the third part of that chapter is. So I think rejection plus criticism, when they come together, actually shape the trajectory that you take. We're a product of our criticism and rejection.
Okay. I want to bring in Urvi and Ruhail and Vasudha into the conversation. And, I like the acronyms you created. I love, I'm a book alcoholic. We do the India Business Led Fest in Pune every year. Now we are taking it to 10 cities. And whatever little I've achieved is because of my wife's luck that rubs off on me, my parents' blessings, my colleagues' hard work. But in some way, because of the books and the amount of reading I still do and I did as a young person. So I loved your book. I mean, I have genuinely loved your book. And you say, sip. I like that term, sip. Small is powerful. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. So give us a sense of how small decisions end up unlocking the limitless potential in you. Give us one or two stories to our readers which are in the book.
Here I have to turn to the mutual fund industry because SIP is in some way, and part of the book, if you notice, has personal finance analogies. But SIP is a tribute to the world I come from, which is the mutual fund industry. And I do believe, by the way, personal finance teaches you a lot about life. The business of money teaches you, which is why there are so many. And in our industry, SIP stands for Systematic Investment Plan. But in very simple terms, it's the habit of saving every month, constantly, month on month. और आप वो saving करते जाते हैं, and then you realize.
So incremental progress, what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the ability to start. Okay, I'm going to do this habit, and then I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm going to keep doing it. And it doesn't matter if I start small. It doesn't matter if I start with 500 rupees, because if I do it long enough, I'll get something big. The reason I talk, in chapter 2, which is where SIP comes, is a chapter about entrepreneurship. It is a chapter about taking risks. And I do feel that today, when we look at starting a business, when a lot of people look at starting something, there's a lot of inertia. That inertia that prevents them from taking the first step. And you almost believe that if you have to start a business today, you need a unicorn on the table. You need something very big on the table. And my argument is no, you don't. You need to start and make a humble start, because life will teach you the lessons along the way. I'm a big believer in execution as a business leader also. I think things are learned not by strategizing, but by starting. And then the reality of business teaches you how to move forward. So, as I say somewhere in the book, in that chapter, you don't have to build the whole ship. You don't have to discover America. You just need to start building a ship. And then the journey will teach you everything else.
I love the book, but the two titles I loved is one is TGIF, Thank God I'm Flawed. And I read this book by Dr. Brené Brown many years back called The Gifts of Imperfection. And I
Yes.
love it. It's one of my favorite top 5 books. I read your chapter in mine, and I love this chapter, the golden AAA, ambition, awareness, and asking. So I've loved the book. Before I let my 3 editorial colleagues come and have fun with you and talk to you more about the book and how to recognize your potential and unlock that potential. Let me ask you, Radhika Gupta, how would you measure the impact of this book? For example, I've enjoyed reading. I've recommended to Urvi Vasudha, to my daughter Prarthana, who's just going to college, and she's got into 7 colleges, but she hasn't got into some of the colleges she wanted to. And I think she should read the book. So
Yes.
tell me, how will you judge the impact of Limitless?
It's a hard question. I would judge it by the number of young people who go out and read it and can connect to a few stories in it. So if your daughter going through her experience can connect to, and I'm already making the connections to 1 or 2 of those stories. I hope that for young people, Limitless is a friend along their journey. That's what I want this book to be. It's not a Bible of new discoveries. I don't pretend to have found something new, but it is an Indian story. It's an Indian narrative. And I hope it is a friend along your journey. I hope that when you're grappling with some of these issues, you pick up this book and, it gives you a little bit of hope. It gives you a little bit of inspiration. That would be the impact. And the real impact would be if a lot more people share stories, because as you said, I think a lot more of us need to go out and talk and share stories.
Fantastic. My last question. You're a successful CEO, now you're an author, and I promise you your book will be a bestseller. There's no question, because it's so, once you start reading it, you continue to read it. What is your bucket list? Do you have a bucket list? What is Radhika Gupta looking to achieve over the next 5-10 years?
I have an answer and I don't have an answer. And I think my answer is impact. I don't know what form that impact will take. I say this towards the end of the book, but I'm driven by impact. I'm driven by making an impact on people's lives. That gives me purpose. Now, whether that is playing a role at a policy level or whether that's playing a role at an industry level, I don't know. I don't plan. But what I have found, Dr. Batra, is that you do things and more opportunities come at you, and they just keep coming at you, and you maximize the opportunities that come your way. So that's what I'm hoping to be. And of course, in the next 6 months, I'm also hoping to be to start an effective journey of motherhood. Maybe my next piece of writing will dismiss all the lessons once I'm done managing a 1-year-old and 2-year-old.
Fantastic, Radhika. We wish you good luck on your journey of being a mother and being a corporate leader, CEO, and now a very successful author whose story and whose insights and authentic experiences hopefully will help other young women, men, to be able to truly realize their limitless potential. Let me bring in Mr. Ruhail Amin, my senior editor, first, and then Vasudha and Urvi. Mr. Amin, you and...
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much, Ms. Gupta. I was just listening to those wonderful stories that you shared. My question is, a lot is being written in this domain. A lot of people who wanted to motivate people There's a lot of content around. In your view, what sets this book apart from the body of work that is there out there?
It's a great question, Rohil, and I asked myself this question too. I think there's a lot of global work. There's a lot of Indian work. I think a couple of things. One is, as I said, this isn't the only success guide. It's not meant to be that. I think there are very few books, however, written with from a young Indian's perspective. There are lots of books on success mantras, on leadership mantras, etc., written by people and very, very accomplished men and women at a much older stage of their career. One of the lovely things that Hatchett told me was that this book comes with a voice of someone who's gone through her 20s and 30s. And I think that's a different sort of story and narrative. The second is, I think there are a lot of great global books written. This is an Indian take on issues because I think our societal conditions and our issues are very, very unique. The way we think about rejection, the challenges we have while taking risks given our family context, the challenges of socioeconomic comparison. This book is an Indian's journey talking about issues that are hopefully closer to the heart and very Indian. And that's really what it is. As I said, I don't pretend to have discovered anything or to say anything new, but to authentically share stories. And because there's stories from a certain era and age group, maybe they will connect with a certain set of people.
And every book has another story which the readers don't know about. They know the complete work, the work that's in front of. But I'm sure a lot of stories, the backstory of writing this book. What was it like? Before I bring in Urvi, this question, yeah.
The backstory was, it was a lot of thinking because I think a book forces you to clarify your own thoughts on issues. It was a lot of internalizing because the book is told through the realm of stories, and some of these are tricky issues to bring out. So you want to bring the issues out in a way that is sensitive. There are also other people involved. So there was a lot of thinking. Some of the more tricky incidences. I talk about miscarriage, for instance, in that book. So there was a lot of grappling with myself about how I wanted to talk about these issues, whether I wanted to talk about these issues, and then how to do so in a way that is sensitive and thoughtful. And I was very clear that the one thing is the book should be authentic. If it's not authentic, it's not worth putting out. So I think finding a self-confidence also to talk about these issues was a big part of writing and putting together Limitless.
Thanks. Urvi, your question.
Thank you so much, Rohil. So, Ms. Gupta, one of the common issues, or not even an issue, a part of the process is facing failure on the way to success, be it at a small scale or a large scale, be it a failing startup or losing a job or anything greater or smaller. Everybody goes through it, which is also one of the key pet peeves for people when they talk about their successful journey. So, can you share some anecdotes from the book and how do you address this ever prevalent issue in your writing?
I think one of my favorite aspects of addressing failure, which I talk about in this book, is the need for an option B in life. I feel, and especially in an Indian context, we are grown up to believe that there is one answer. You chase one goal. Acha, mujhe IAS mein aana hai. I want to become an engineer, etc., etc. And that's great. And you chase that goal with tremendous passion, and you work really hard at it. And sometimes the game of odds plays out. I mean, my father was telling me the story, and he's a civil services guy. He coaches new aspirants. That kids will pass the preliminary exam, they will pass the main exam, and they will make it to that final interview stage. And in a game of odds, they will not crack that interview. And had they cracked that interview, they would have been celebrated and been a big civil services entrant whose name would have been in newspapers. And just because that one moment didn't happen, you're left with this big feeling of failure, and then it's a societal failure and it's a family failure. one of the things that I talk about is the importance of also having option B in life. Nothing is truly the end of the world. And that is something I've come to believe. And I think that makes your journey a lot easier. As Dr. Batra also said, I think all of our careers are in that sense a little bit of chance, a little bit of luck, and they puzzle together. If you look at mine also, it's a little bit of things coming together. So I keep saying that, while it's important to work after one goal, to manage failure better, it's also important to realize that there's no one be all and end all in life, finally, right? There are multiple options. There's no one perfect opportunity. Find any opportunity and then make it a good one.
When we talk about something like success, as you said, of course, there is an option A that people work towards, and you also have to have an option B that you are open-minded towards. So when we talk about balancing multiple options, the idea of taking intelligent risks comes into play. So how does the book address the idea of risk taking? To what extent is taking a risk justifiable? And if it doesn't work out, how does one psychologically, should I say, console themselves?
So I think my perspective on risk is a little different. And I come from the profession again. I'm very shaped by the profession I come from. My profession is the one of taking intelligent risks and earning rewards and taking risks that you're comfortable with. We come from societal extremes where, there was an era that talked about permanent jobs and the importance of that. And now we live in sort of startup era. I think life is somewhere in the middle. And by the way, I don't think risk taking only means leaving your job and starting a startup. Yeah, risk taking means getting out of your comfort zone to an extent that you can. And so I've talked about my own experiences with entrepreneurship. And I've also talked about what is the right time to take a risk, how to have some of those conversations as young people about risk taking at home. And some of the challenges that I've seen a lot of people in corporate careers go through while taking risks, which is, I've got this designation and I've got this business card. What if I fail and how will I deal with that? So, the challenges of not just collecting options.
When we talk about risk taking and making intelligent decisions, the ultimate goal for everybody is to become what they would define as success.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about achieving goals, before I call in my colleague, I wanted to ask you, as somebody who is a CEO and now an author, what does success mean to you? How would you define it as an individual?
I think firstly, it's very personal. So I think everybody's definition of success is very personal. And this is our learning. It's taken me much longer to have because, and I will tell you my current definition, but I think 15 years ago, my definition was the standard one. I grew up saying I wanted to be rich and famous. That's what my mother tells me. I want to be rich and famous, and that was a definition of success. Now my definition is a lot more nuanced. I want to be happy in what I do every day. I want to work with a certain kind of people. As a professional, I want to have a certain amount of freedom in work. I want to do work that makes impact. Is money important to me? It's less important in this scheme. Of course, I want to be paid fairly for what I do. So for me, success is impact. And I don't think that's the only definition of success. If your definition of success is money, if your definition of success is power, that works. It's just important to have that definition. As I said, choosing your sky.
Of course, success evolves as we also grow and mature. The conventional idea, of course, there from the very outset, I think most of us have the same starting point of ticking certain boxes when it comes to being a successful person. So I would like to invite Vasudha now to ask the next set of questions.
Thank you, Urvi. Radhika, you're on mute, I believe.
Yes.
Radhika, thank you so much for coming on this platform. First of all, you're clearly a very good storyteller. I mean, there's so many different stories in there. Some are very, very personal. You've told stories about some of the people you've met. And also, you mentioned a lot of movies. There's a lot of movie references in your book. So I have to ask you, what made you want to include that? Because, we do have all these personal stories of your own experiences, and then it's kind of juxtaposed with all these movie references. Can you tell us what was behind that decision?
Yeah, and as I said, the book was not an autobiography. It was a way to share thoughts, and the thoughts were shared largely with my personal experiences, but also with anecdotes that mean something to me. I've been asked this question about movie references a lot. I think I picked references that meant something to me. I love the movies. While I'm a terrible singer, I'm probably the best Antakshari player in the world because I remember every film lyric in most film dialogues. I like words. You'll see references from things like Alice in Wonderland and a lot of literature. So all the references are not ones that I went looking for. I never said, I'm going to go find movie references. I picked things that I grew up with that have always meant something to me and put them together. So in that sense, it was very, very organic. I also must say that, the book is meant for young people, Vasudha. And one of my realizations is in doing so many conversations is that we don't read too much. We as a country, unfortunately, don't read too much. I wanted to put out content that was meaningful yet readable. And that's a balance I was trying to strike. So I thought the play of stories and examples hopefully would come together in a way that is readable, homegrown, both.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely plays into this idea that you're saying that this is an Indian book and it's an Indian experience. And definitely the movies add to that, and the books also kind of add to that. But I also wanted to ask you, because, right off the beginning, you give us these 3 different stories, but you say that they all have something in common. And in fact, you get all these emails and they all have something in common. Now, to me, they just seemed so very different. Can you tell us in your own words, what is it that you saw in these stories that you heard from other people that was common to you, that made you want to sort of inspired you to write this book?
And by the way, those are 3 stories. I think they are 3 out of hundreds that come to me. I think in those stories, there were a couple of common themes. Vulnerability was the most common theme. The fact that people are vulnerable, they have these experiences, they have these limitations, they have these challenges. And the second was the desire to speak out and share. Because remember, they're sharing these stories with a stranger, an absolute unknown stranger who they're writing mails to in their inbox. And in sharing these stories, they're sharing them for a sense of sharing, they're sharing them for a sense of catharsis. So I think the common theme was honest, vulnerable, authentic storytelling. And the other theme that I think, you have to give credit for, which is where the title came from, is aspiration. Ultimately, all these people were very aspirational. They wanted to do better than their current circumstances. They wanted not to be held back. They were ambitious. In whatever little circle of influence they had, they wanted to do more.
No, absolutely. I think honest, authentic, aspirational stories is actually the perfect way to kind of describe what your book is all about. But I also want to ask you, because, you did make this point in your book as well, that despite hearing all these success stories and hearing about the struggles that people go through and knowing that everyone out there is struggling in their own right, for some reason, people don't resonate with stories of struggle. It's still not enough for them to kind of like accept that, their rejection is just part of the way. Why do you think that is?
I actually think a little differently. I think people privately do resonate with stories of struggle. I say this in chapter 5 of the book, but when I did the talk, the number of comments I've got with people resonating with stories of struggle is far more than the ones with people. I mean, I haven't had people write to me their success stories. In fact, if anything, they've written what I call the Jo Jeeta Wohi Sikandar, the model college saga, the struggle that is then, followed by success. So I actually think privately, people are looking to understand and share stories of struggle. It's just that it's not publicly done.
No, I mean, that could be very well true. In fact, I mean, I think like we were talking about how there is this whole space online for also sharing success stories. And I think the success part tends to take center stage over the struggle part sometimes. And
Yeah.
I think this book does a good job of, again, balancing the kind of the good, bad, and the ugly parts of, someone's journey. But let me also ask you, because you also talk a lot about breaking tradition.
Mhm.
And in a lot of ways, your book is breaking few of our taboos and tradition. There's a little bit of swearing in there. There's a lot of vulnerability, like you have mentioned. But can you tell us in your own words, like, what traditions do we absolutely need to do away with?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the first tradition, and I'm just remembering some of the lines. I think ambition is the first tradition. I think limited aspirations is one of them. There's I don't know if I finally retained the line in the book, but there's a line about, don't dream more than your circumstances. I mean, in Hindi, it is literally jitni chadar hai utne paanv phailao. I think that's one that we need to talk about. There's another one which I think really applies for women, which is the quest to be perfect. And I talk about work-life balance a little bit later. But the need to do 100% at work and 100% at life all the time, and the quest to find this incredible and mythical balance that doesn't really exist. In fact, I should tell you that about 3 weeks ago, when Limitless was announced, someone trolled me for writing this book, and said, "Oh, how can you be a full-time CEO and do that?" And it's funny that that happens, right? Because just the next day, there was an article about how the global CEO of Goldman has like formed a band, plays in bands all the time, has his own label, and people were celebrating this. Why don't we do it here? So the belief that I have to be 24/7 at work and I can't have a life, and if I do, then I'm not a good professional. In fact, I can be both. Perhaps having a more balanced existence makes me a very good professional as well.
It sounds like this whole book has definitely, like, writing this book itself has also been a journey. And before I bring in my colleague, I would like to ask you, having gone through the journey of writing this book, what lessons have you kind of learned through this, and, that you could maybe add on to now in this conversation?
One, it's a lot of hard work. That it is a lot of hard work, and it's much harder work than I thought it would be. It's also very refreshing. It's very clarifying in your own head to finally put out content, and it's very energizing when people read the content and tell you a story back. I had a colleague who read one of the chapters, which mentions a sort of tragic incident personally, and she had just gone through something like that. And then when she wrote back and said that that chapter helped her get through something like that, it's also very enriching. So it's a lot of work. And I think some of the lessons, by the way, that I wrote in the book also apply to writing a book. So getting started, doing it consistently, being a little bit authentic, I think that's also important in the creation of content.
Oh, thank you so much. You're right. It is kind of like a circle of learning. You kind of learn the same lesson a little bit differently each time. I would like to now pass the mic to my colleague, Ruhail.
Thank you, Vasudha. Radhika, if you could hear me, yeah. Okay. What has also happened, for any author, the best compliment or the best review is if somebody really has got affected in a positive way.
Yeah.
So far, are there any stories? Have you heard any feedback on your book, stories on this?
No, so they're lovely stories. As I said, I think the one that's probably closest to my heart is, as I said, I talk about miscarriages and incident, and that was, what one of the tougher ones to talk about also. But when someone in the office said that they had read that, and that meant something to them in their own journey, I think that was, exceptional. The other one that I always love hearing is from fathers who send the book to their daughters. So just because I think that that's a very personal thing, and if someone goes and tells me that this is a book I'm sharing with my daughter, that's always something I feel very nice about.
So tell me, what is the harshest criticism that you have overcome in your say,
Ooh.
professional, personal life, and how did it affect you initially? How did you overcome that?
Oh, I think the one in the book was pretty rough. I mean, the whole, you're not emotionally mature, you can't handle people. That's a tough one. And, it's a tough one for many people to overcome. I am currently dealing with leaders who are struggling with that kind, because we often believe as we rise in the workplace that success is business performance, and it is only business performance. And at some point, I think it takes a while for the reality to sit in that, listen, it's not only business performance, there is something more. I often say that there are leadership is the topic, and managing people, on which there are thousands of books written, and yet it is the hardest thing for people to do. Every leader has stories of how they struggle with that. So I think for me it was that phase, the whole working with people phase. And I as I said, nobody is born figuring that out. And while many books can be written on this, you really learn by doing. So I think that journey in the last 3-4 years has been the hardest one.
Right. A lot of authors, who write, say, books to motivate people and to give them hope. Do you feel the author always the needs to have a first-hand experience of it, or it can also be something one understands well? How would you differentiate between the two approaches?
I think you can recount first-hand experience with a certain set of authenticity and detail that is special. And the way I approached this was to take first-hand experience. And I do have a bunch of stories of people I have seen. But the feedback I'm getting, to be more honest, is the personal stories resonate more than the observations of others' experience, because perhaps your ability, and this is a learning for me, your ability to narrate you think your own stories are ordinary and other people's are extraordinary. But your telling of your own stories, I think, is far more nuanced than your ability to observe someone else's.
Okay, so my final question before Vasudas and Urvi, come with their final questions is, what is your message to the readers? To buy and purchase this book, to read this book. What would you like to tell them?
Look, I'd like to tell them there are lots of books out there, but especially, and I keep saying, especially for young readers, people looking to build corporate careers, people who are aspirational, ambitious in today's India. Here's a guide. It's not the only guide out there, but it's a very honest, authentic guide of stories and of issues that many of us face, that I have faced and many of us face. And I'd encourage you to pick it up and treat it as a companion. And yes, the good thing is books don't cost much in India. They cost what, pizza from Domino's does.
That's so right. Vasudha, if you could hear me, maybe you can ask your last question and then Urvi.
I'll just ask one or two questions and I'll call Vasudha in. Is that all right? So I wanted to ask you that, given that you have, of course, highlighted your own experience and the experience of various other people in addition to fictional references. So what, according to you, is the biggest pet peeve of the generation today when it comes to their path to success? Is it receiving constructive criticism, the fear of failure, or what is it that the people fear the most today?
I think it's finding purpose at work, actually, which is addressed towards the latter half of the book. And you have to realize today's generation is growing up in a very different India. I'd refer to something from Limitless, and it's something I've heard from my father and father-in-law. They grew up in an India of scarcity. Having a job for them was meaning. They didn't need to seek out meaning in the job. I grew up in the 90s where still it was not an India of abundance. I mean, I still remember moving back in the 90s, and when people would come back from the US and carry Tang and carry electronics, there was a certain kick about that. Landline connections were tricky. This is a generation grow. And so for mine also, I think money, etc., were very important drivers of success when we started work. For this generation, it's an abundant India. It's probably an abundant set of parents that they have. So finding meaning and purpose at the workplace is greatly important, which is why you see so many issues at work, which is why you see the great resignation globally, which is why people are not sticking around long enough, and which is why bosses in their 40s and 50s are struggling to figure out how to handle the millennial generation at work. So I think finding purpose in what you do is the biggest one.
Right. The book also talks about your personal journey. For instance, you talk about your own difficulty in taking constructive criticism and not taking it as a personal attack.
Yeah.
So what was the moment of epiphany for you when you realized that they are not coming from a place of bias or to hurt the individual, but they are actually giving you something which can come as a positive feedback? What was that one moment or one instance for you?
I think I've mentioned it in the book, but there was a moment where I got the same criticism from someone I got angry at, that I got from my mother. And when I got it from my mother, I took it fine because I felt she's my mother. But when I heard the same thing from someone else, I got very upset about it. But when I rationalized it in my head, and someone told me this later, why is someone taking the effort to even criticize you? If they don't care about it, they won't criticize you, they'll ignore you. And I think that was a big learning.
Okay, so with that, I'll invite Vasudha with the final set of questions. Over to you, Vasudha.
Thank you, Urvi. And thank you, Radhika, so much. I mean, listening to all this conversation has been really, really interesting and nice. And it also makes the book kind of come together better for me. But I wanted to ask you, because you have kind of finished this book. I only have 2 questions, don't worry. In hindsight, is there anything you wish you could have added to the book? Or is there anything that you think you can build upon? And you said you were supposed to write this book at 60. So what would that book at the age of 60 have that this one doesn't?
It'd be very different. And I guess my learning is that there is no one book, and there is no one version of you, because you are finally a collection of experiences that you are shaped by. And memory is not that good, by the way. So perhaps every 10 years, you'll have a different perspective and you'll have a different story to tell. Perhaps 10 years later, my experience in managing people, for example, that's a topic I haven't touched on this book, even though I do manage a large number of people, because I just felt I needed to evolve a lot more in this space. So perhaps that, will form something. I'm also one for feedback. So I keep telling everyone with Limitless, give me the feedback. Let me see the feedback. But I think there is no one, the whole writing a book at 60, I think is obsolete. I think we are different versions of people, and we will have different things to say at different points in our life, and hopefully people will be kind enough to listen.
I think they are. I mean, definitely. I mean, you're here, people have logged in to listen, and this is going to be on every platform for people to come and watch later on, even if they don't pick up the book, which I hope they do, because it is quite riveting. I'd like to ask you my final question, and this is something I'd like to ask all the authors that come on our platform, is do you have a favorite book? And or you can choose to answer these 2 questions. Are you reading something right now, and what are you reading?
Okay, I am not reading right now because I have been so busy in this book phase, but I do read a lot of books. I don't read too much in this genre. Ironically, for someone who's written nonfiction, I don't read too much nonfiction. I used to read a ton of fiction, and a lot of global fiction. So, I'll pick up books from Africa or from the US or wherever. So I love historical fiction. My favorite book, and it's very hard to pick a favorite, is one that I have referenced in Limitless, which is a book I've read 3 times in fiction at 3 different stages in my life. It's called To Kill a Mockingbird. And I think it's a great understanding and perspective on how to look at people.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for answering that. And thank you so much for taking time out today. Eid Mubarak. And, I know it's a day off for you. So thank you so much for coming here and discussing. For anyone who's watching, if you want to go back and rewatch this entire dialogue, you can do that on any of the social media platforms, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and you can find this book at any bookstore now. It's out now. It's also available, of course, on our favorite big selling websites if you want to order online. Thank you, Radhika, so much for joining us today, and best of luck with all you have ahead of you and with this book. We hope to hear from you again in the future.
Thank you, guys, and Eid Mubarak to everybody.